There comes a moment in the soul's journey when holding on becomes more painful than letting go, when silence speaks louder than promises, and absence teaches more than presence ever could. It is in this sacred, often agonizing moment that we are faced with a choice, not just to release another person, but to return to ourselves. When we choose to let someone go, particularly someone who has held deep emotional or spiritual significance in our lives, it is not merely an external event. It is a profound inner confrontation. The departure of that person from our life space acts as a trigger, unsettling the carefully arranged furniture of the psyche. In this disorientation, we come face to face with something we often avoid, the shadow. This shadow is not simply the dark side of the self in a moral sense. It is the repository of all the parts of us we have denied, rejected, or repressed, often because they were too painful, too complicated, or too overwhelming to acknowledge when we first encountered them. Relationships, especially those laced with emotional intensity, act like mirrors. We project parts of ourselves onto others, both our virtues and our wounds. We might see in them the warmth we long for, the attention we crave, the safety we once missed in childhood, or the ambition we wish we had. But we might also see in them the chaos, rejection, or pain we have yet to make peace with. These projections live beneath the surface of our awareness, and it is only when the relationship breaks, when we let go, that the mirror shatters and we are forced to see what we were truly looking at all along. The image we constructed of the other begins to collapse, and in that falling away we are left face to face with our own psychic architecture. The shadow stirs most violently in the silence that follows letting go. It whispers questions that cut deeper than the usual narratives of heartbreak. Why were you drawn to them? What need did they fill? What fear did they quiet? In the stillness, we begin to see that perhaps we held on to this person not simply because of who they were, but because of what they represented, an escape from loneliness, a projection of our own unhealed pain. The spiritual process begins when we stop blaming circumstances or others and start listening to what our inner world is trying to tell us through the ache of absence. Anna's relation tomorrow is not comfortable. It can feel like a spiritual unraveling. Emotions surface that seem disproportionate. Memories rise uninvited. Dreams may become more vivid or disturbing, and a sense of disorientation can linger. But this is not chaos. It is the unconscious seeking to communicate. It is the inner self inviting you to reintegrate the lost or forgotten parts of your psyche. Every emotional trigger, every pang of longing or grief, is not a sign of weakness, but a clue, pointing to the very places in the soul that need healing and recognition. Letting someone go spiritually is thus an act of radical honesty. It is the moment we stop using another person as a canvas for our unconscious material and begin to reclaim those projections as aspects of our own inner life. It requires courage, not the courage to forget them, but the courage to see yourself more clearly in their absence. The shadow may bring discomfort, but within it lies immense transformative power. By facing it, we do not only mourn a person, we begin to recover the disowned fragments of our own soul. When you make the conscious decision to let someone go, something profound happens on a spiritual level. The part of your identity that was entangled with them begins to dissolve. This dissolution is often experienced as a form of ego death, not in the dramatic or total annihilation of the self, but in the collapse of a version of you that existed only in relation to that person. The ego, which thrives on attachment, continuity, and the familiar, suddenly finds itself without the narrative it once relied upon. You are no longer their partner, their friend, their protector, or the one they needed. The story unravels, and with it, the structure of the self that had been built upon it begins to crack. This ego death is disorienting because it removes the psychological scaffolding that gave your sense of self meaning, purpose, and place. You may find yourself unsure of who you are now, without their presence to reflect you, affirm you, or even oppose you. The roles and routines that once offered security suddenly vanish, leaving behind an emotional void. That void, while painful, is sacred. It is the threshold space, the in-between where your previous identity dies and a new, more authentic self begins to emerge. But this emergence is not immediate. First, the ego resists. It clings to memory, to fantasy, to what could have been. It replays conversations, reimagines scenarios, and clutches desperately at closure, which it often never receives. The ego fears annihilation, so it fights for survival in the only way it knows how, by holding on. Yet, the very act of letting go is a rebellion against that egoic clinging. It is an act of surrender. In this surrender, a spiritual portal opens. You begin to sense that the pain you feel is not just about loss, it is about transformation. You start to see that the love, the longing, and even the heartbreak were never external phenomena alone. They were inner experiences, rooted in your own soul. The person may be gone, but what remains is the inner journey that was awakened by their presence and now intensified by their absence. This rebirth is slow and often unseen. At first, it might feel like emptiness, like walking through fog. You may feel raw, vulnerable, and stripped of certainty, but this nakedness is holy. It allows the soul to speak without the interference of ego masks or emotional armor. As the old identity dissolves, new insights begin to arise. You notice your patterns. You begin to understand your emotional dependencies, your unconscious needs, your wounds that sought healing through another. And in that realization, you start to reclaim power. Not the power to control others, but the power to redefine yourself without them. Spiritually, this is resurrection. Out of the ashes of a broken attachment, a truer self begins to rise, one not built on illusion or projection, but on deeper self-acknowledge and inner alignment. The detachment does not make you colder, it makes you clearer. You may grieve the loss, but you no longer grieve from powerlessness. You grieve with awareness, with reverence for what was, and with gratitude for what it taught you about yourself. The ego may still whisper doubts, but its voice grows quieter as your inner foundation strengthens. The spiritual act of letting go, then, is not an ending. It is the sacred space in which the soul awakens to its own depth, sovereignty, and truth. Letting someone go is more than a personal decision. It is a sacred turning point in the journey of the soul toward wholeness. Spiritually, it marks the beginning or deepening of a process often referred to as individuation. This is the inward journey of becoming who you truly are, beneath all the roles, identities, and attachments that have shaped you. But it is not simply a psychological maturation, but a spiritual one, in which the self begins to align with its deeper nature beyond the surface personality. When someone plays a significant emotional or symbolic role in your life, they often represent something far larger than themselves. They may symbolize safety, passion, purpose, or even pain you haven't fully understood. As a result, your relationship with them becomes a container for growth, but also a potential trap if your identity becomes fused with theirs. When you let them go, the container breaks open. The structure collapses, and what remains is the raw, unfiltered essence of who you are when no one is watching, expecting, or defining you. In that state, the real work begins. You start to see the illusions you once lived within, the ways you compromised your truth, quieted your voice, or distorted your path to maintain the connection. Sometimes this sacrifice is subtle, a slow silencing of needs, a gradual reshaping of dreams, a quiet erosion of authenticity. In letting go, all of those buried aspects begin to rise. The real self, long overshadowed by the demands of the relationship, begins to speak, and what it says may surprise you. It may not crave another relationship or seek to fill the space that was left. Instead, it seeks integration. It longs for harmony within. This is the essence of individuation, the process of reclaiming and uniting the fragmented parts of the psyche. The parts you projected onto the other now return to you. Perhaps you admired their confidence, their creativity, their freedom. These qualities, though reflected in them, belong to you as well. Letting go is a symbolic retrieval of those lost qualities. In their absence, you are called to cultivate them within yourself rather than search for them external. It is a humbling yet empowering transformation, from dependence to inner embodiment. This journey is not linear. It does not move smoothly from loss to clarity. There are regressions, moments of deep longing, and the temptation to return to what is familiar. But each time you resist the pull backward, you strengthen your center. You come closer to your essence, not the one conditioned by attachment, but the one born of solitude, reflection, and truth. The spiritual silence that follows letting go is not emptiness, it is sacred space. Out the same way. A space where the authentic self, slowly, patiently, begins to take form. Letting go, then, is not just a painful goodbye, it is an initiation into the deeper work of knowing and becoming yourself. Not the self shaped by another's love or rejection, but the self that exists in its own right, with its own rhythm, its own light, and its own voice. This is the quiet revolution of the soul, the moment it begins to walk its own path, not out of bitterness, but out of an inner calling that can no longer be denied. The person may have been part of your story, but your wholeness was never dependent on their presence. It was waiting for your return, all along. When you let someone go on a spiritual level, you are not only releasing them from your physical life, you are also unbinding the threads of psychic energy that have been wrapped around them, often unconsciously, for days, months, or even years. Emotional attachment is not a surface experience. It extends deeply into the psyche, drawing energy from your core to sustain a bond that may have become draining or the energy invested in thinking about them, longing for them, anticipating their reactions, or replaying shared experiences is not passive. It is vital energy, spiritual currency, and when that bond is severed, whether through choice or necessity, that energy begins to return to its source. At first, this returning energy can feel disorienting. You may suddenly find yourself in a strange state of stillness, no longer consumed by the constant background noise of emotional entanglement. What once filled your mental and emotional space is gone, leaving behind a vast emptiness. But this emptiness is not a void to be feared. It is the clearing of a sacred field. Into this space flows the psychic energy you had unknowingly exiled to someone else's orbit. That energy, freed from longing, worry, resentment, or fantasy, becomes available for inner transformation. This reclaimed energy often doesn't announce itself in obvious ways. It may appear first as restlessness, a feeling of unfamiliar spaciousness. But over time, you may notice your creativity beginning to stir. New ideas form. You find clarity where there was confusion. Passions once set aside begin to reawaken. You feel drawn to different people, places, or paths. None of this is accidental. The return of your energy is also the return of your direction. When we are emotionally bound to someone, our spiritual compass often becomes magnetized toward them. We seek their validation, move in reaction to their actions, or wait for their acknowledgement. When that pull is released, the compass realigns, not to another person, but to your own inner truth. Letting go spiritually also allows suppressed emotions to rise to the surface, and this is another way psychic energy is redirected. Grief, anger, guilt, and fear all carry energy. When denied or repressed, these feelings act as spiritual blockages, quietly draining life force. But when allowed to surface and be witnessed, they transform. The energy they once held in tension begins to circulate. You feel lighter, not because the emotion has vanished, but because it has moved. In this movement, healing occurs. There is also a deeper mystery at work. Spiritual traditions often speak of the energetic cords we form with others, and while these are metaphorical, they point to a real psychological phenomenon. Strong attachments create inner pathways through which energy flows. These pathways can become imbalanced when love turns to dependency, or when giving outweighs receiving. By letting go, these cords are loosened or even severed. It is not an act of cruelty or indifference, but of balance. The soul seeks equilibrium, and letting go is often its way of restoring it. As this process unfolds, you may notice that you begin to feel more centered. Decision-making becomes clearer. Your emotional body feels less reactive, more spacious. You no longer leak energy toward what no longer serves you. Instead, your presence deepens. You become more grounded in your body, more connected to the moment. This is not the numbness of detachment. It is the vitality of integration. Energy, once fragmented and externally focused, now consolidates around your own being. You begin to feel whole again, not because someone else completed you, but because you stopped giving away the pieces. And in this wholeness, the soul finds rest. When you let someone go spiritually, something subtle yet transformative takes place. You break the mirror through which you were unconsciously seeing yourself. In every close relationship, especially the deeply emotional ones, the other person functions as a mirror. Through them, we see not only who they are, but who we believe we are. We see our worth reflected in their attention, our wounds mirrored in their rejections, our hopes shining in their acceptance. This mirror is not always accurate, but it becomes a powerful influence, shaping the way we view ourselves, others, and the world. It forms a kind of emotional identity scaffolding, and once we decide to let the person go, that mirror shatters, often leaving us exposed to the raw truth of our own reflection. The mirror was never just a reflection of them, it was a projection of you. Much of what we love or hate in others is deeply connected to unconscious parts of ourselves. When you feel deeply drawn to someone, it is rarely just about them. Often it is about the qualities in them that you desire in yourself: confidence, creativity, freedom, or emotional availability. Likewise, what we resent in others may be traits we repress or deny within ourselves. This is the psychological mechanism of projection, attributing inner material, both light and shadow, onto someone else, so we can interact with it at a safe distance. The relationship then becomes a stage where our inner conflicts, desires, and forgotten aspects of the self are played out. Letting someone go disrupts this psychic arrangement. When the person is no longer in your life, the projection collapses. You can no longer see yourself through their responses, their praise, their indifference, or their presence. This creates an uncomfortable vacuum. Who are you without their reflection, without their validation or judgment, without the emotional resonance they once provided? This question can be disorienting, but it is also liberating. For the first time, you are given the chance to see yourself not through distortion, but directly and clearly. In this space, you begin to reclaim the aspects of yourself you had outsourced. You start to realize that the strength you admired in them was a strength you were meant to awaken in yourself. The love you craved from them was a mirror of the love you withheld from yourself. The pain they triggered in you pointed to unhealed places long buried beneath the surface. The mirror, now broken, reveals the pieces not of the other person, but of your own soul. These pieces are not fragments of loss, but fragments of potential. They ask to be gathered, understood, and reintegrated into your being. This confrontation with yourself can feel stark and unsettling. Without the mirror, there is no distraction. The illusions fall away. You may feel loneliness more acutely, but that loneliness is also space, the sacred ground where the self can emerge, not in reaction to another, but in authenticity. The absence becomes a teacher, forcing you to look inward, to listen more deeply, and to recognize that your identity is not dependent on being seen, loved, or understood by someone else. It is something more enduring, more rooted. Over time, as you reclaim these parts of yourself, your inner vision clears. You stop needing someone to reflect your worth because you begin to feel it intrinsically. You stop fearing rejection because you no longer define your value by someone else's presence. You become less dependent on external affirmation and more attuned to your internal compass. Letting go of the mirror doesn't mean erasing the person. It means retrieving the power you unknowingly gave to their reflection. And in doing so, you step into a deeper, more stable relationship with yourself. One that no longer relies on someone else to show you who you are. Letting someone go spiritually opens the door to deep emotional alchemy, a transformation where pain is not simply endured, but transmuted into wisdom, compassion, and inner strength. This process is not instantaneous. It unfolds slowly, often through the uncomfortable confrontation with sorrow, longing, and even regret. But within these emotional layers lies a sacred opportunity to allow what once broke you, to rebuild you from within. Emotional alchemy is the soul's innate ability to take the raw materials of heartache and turn them into something golden, not in spite of the suffering, but because of it. At the core of this transformation is the willingness to feel fully. When we lose someone emotionally, through a breakup, a betrayal, or simply growing apart, we are left with emotions that surge like waves: grief, anger, emptiness, even numbness. They rise, often unpredictably, and demand to be acknowledged. Most people try to avoid these emotions, fearing they will drown in them. But the soul knows better. It understands that by moving through the emotion rather than around it, healing begins. Pain is not the enemy. It is the initiator of depth, a call inward that insists on presence, honesty, and vulnerability. This emotional intensity forces you to shed the superficial and engage with your inner world more intimately. In the silence that follows a separation, you begin to hear the quiet voice of your own truth. You realize what you ignored, compromised, or denied while you were entangled with the other. You see the ways you gave yourself away in hopes of being chosen, or the patterns you repeated in the name of love. These insights are not meant to induce shame. They are the tools of transformation. The more clearly you see yourself, the more clearly you can shape your future. And as this self-awareness deepens, a strange thing happens. You start to feel gratitude, not for the pain itself, but for what it reveals. The moments of heartbreak become moments of clarity. You begin to understand that love, in its highest form, is never meant to possess or imprison. It is meant to expand, to reflect, and to teach. Letting someone go often means letting go of an illusion, the idea that you needed them to complete you, validate you, or fix your wounds. Once that illusion fades, the emotional energy tied to it is freed, and what remains is the essence of love without attachment. That love is not directed outward. It begins to turn inward. This is where alchemy fully takes root. The love that once flowed toward the other now flows toward your inner world, feeding your spirit rather than depleting it. You begin to treat yourself with more patience, more gentleness. You become less reactive, more accepting of the mystery of life and relationships. The pain softens into insight, and the insight blossoms into wisdom. This wisdom isn't intellectual. It's felt. It lives in your bones, your breath, your being. It changes the way you relate, not only to others, but to yourself. As you carry this wisdom forward, your relationships begin to shift. You no longer attract people based on wounded patterns. You begin to align with others from a place of wholeness, not need. And even when love enters your life again, it does so differently. Not as a rescue, but as a resonance. You are no longer seeking someone to fix your brokenness because the alchemy has already done its work. What was once pain is now presence. What was once loss is now growth. And what was once longing has become a deeper connection to your own soul. This is the quiet miracle that takes place when you let someone go and choose instead to return fully to yourself. To let someone go is not to lose love, but to liberate it. It is to reclaim the pieces of your soul that were scattered in longing, dependency, and illusion. It is to see clearly, perhaps for the first time, that wholeness was never outside of you. It was waiting, quietly, beneath the noise of attachment. This is not the end of love. It is the beginning of truth. And in that truth the spirit finds its strength, its freedom, and its path forward, not because someone stayed, but because you had the courage to let them go.